reason that I'm talking about mindful eating is that in my internal medicine practice, I discovered that a lot of people who had issues with eating knew all the right answers about nutrition, diet. It was really hard to find someone who didn't really know the right answers about that, and yet people were stuck often in their eating habits. So I became very interested in looking at the background of eating habits and what goes into why we eat what we do. And then in 2006, obesity surpassed smoking as the number one preventable cause for illness and death. So I was on a committee in the hospital that was looking at what to do about obesity, and the answer of the hospital system at that time really was a bariatric program. And what they meant by that was bariatric surgery. And that's what they meant. And so I was the lone voice on this committee who kept asking questions about concerns about micronutrient loss, about the emotional fallout, and shouldn't there be additional programs? And after I think about the fifth meeting, they stopped inviting me. And I would say about a year later, after the program was up and running, I started seeing, at that time I had switched from doing internal medicine and had started an integrative medicine program for that hospital. And so I was seeing kind of a broader range of patients. And I started seeing in my clinic exactly the kinds of concerns that I had had. So, severe anemia, pernicious anemia, which is related to B12 deficiency. And I'm not saying, by the way, that there is not a role for bariatric surgery. I just want to be clear about that. But there also are other things that can be done. So at the time, I had been doing Vipassana meditation for quite a number of years. And it crossed my mind that John Kabat-Zinn had done some really great research on a variety of things, stress and pain and some other things associated with mindfulness. And every single parameter that he looked at had a statistical difference of benefit from learning mindfulness. So I thought, why not? And so I created a series of classes, and they were hugely successful. My first class was 40 people, and by the second year of teaching these classes, people were asking me for a textbook, and at that time there were no books on the subject. So I wrote the book, and the year it came out, there were 3 books by the same name that came out with people much more famous than me. But at any rate, it's an idea whose time has come. So I'm going to talk first about the many reasons that we eat. So the reasons that we eat, in all of the years and the thousands of people who have come to classes that I've taught on mindful eating, when I do the class series, I always ask, what are the reasons that you eat? And I usually have a big board that I write them down. And to my astonishment, I realized somewhere along the line that it's very seldom that people actually write hunger. Very seldom that people actually say hunger. And there was a great research. I collaborated with a PhD student who needed a research project, and so we agreed to look at these classes. And as a part of that, she did a literature review and found a great research article that dissected apart the main reasons that people eat. And the number one reason are emotional reasons. And the number 2 reason is associated just with habit. It's 6 o'clock. You don't really ask whether you're hungry or not, and there's a certain amount that you put on the plate and so on. And the number 3rd reason is not really being mindful. So, you're typing emails and you suddenly realize there's like an empty bag of what was potato chips beside you and there's nobody else in the room. And it's like, there's a lot of calories that just went down the tube that you didn't even notice. So it's just plain not paying attention. And the biggest reason, though, is the whole emotional element. So I want to talk about that for a minute. I want to bore down into that a little bit more. When you are feeling, we'll say, fear or anxious, talk to me about how that feels in your body. You're feeling anxious. Where do you feel it? How do you feel it? How do you know?
Chest.
Your chest?
Mm-hmm. Sour stomach.
Sour stomach?
I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In the throat, too.
So anything that has, you mentioned sour stomach, anything that has a sense qualitatively of a tension or a discomfort inside of our internal matrix, particularly the stomach, but anywhere inside, our first learned response to those sensations is to eat. And so eating is soothing. From the very, very beginning of our life, eating was associated with nurturance. Eating is associated with distraction. Eating is associated with taking care of ourselves. Almost always, all of this is not conscious. Almost always, we have a sense, a sensation in the body, and we just do what's familiar to us to do to take care of that. And we don't even think about it. And this is where the whole mindfulness comes in. And I'm going to talk about sort of the action algorithm of how it is that we move from having a sensation to eating. I'm going to break that up into different parts. But by and large, the number one reason that most people eat, in America in particular, it's very rare that anyone has experienced deep pang of hunger. It's unusual. We might have a beginning sensation of it, but most of the time we eat because it's time or because, we might just start to feel a little bit hungry. Now, another facet that I want to add to this conversation is I encourage that rather than thinking in terms of losing weight or being on a diet or any such thing, that we frame the conversation as what is it that I want to do, want to have, want to accomplish. And the reason I say that is that we are geared for survival. And speaking of subconscious, if the subconscious hears a phrase of you can't have, or you're going to have to go without, or a sense of punishment, or any such thing, there's an automatic reaction that as soon as our back is turned on ourselves, we go full bore for what? Nourishment, being taken care of, solace, soothing. And some people have told me that they're sure that the less they eat, the less they need to eat to still gain weight. And they're right. They're absolutely right. We have a barostat, I call it, that is associated with how much food we have available, and we are able to survive on very, very little. And so we're able to survive on even less the more often we give ourselves less. So this yo-yo effect that people talk about, diet, gain weight, diets work great as long as you're on them, but then you get off. And the yo-yo almost always goes higher than it was before. And it's because, meanwhile, the barostat has changed. I found it really interesting. We recently reread speaking of Dachau, The Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, and he wrote as a psychiatrist, having been through the Holocaust and in concentration camps for years. And it was amazing how these people could live on one bowl of mostly water soup and one dry piece of bread rind day after day after day. And they survived. We actually can survive on very little. And our barostat accommodates as best as it can. So when we change our thinking, when we change our approach to ourself, to saying, okay, sweetheart, what is it you really need here? And we get real curious about that. And we try to answer the needs of our body-mind in a way that happens before we reach for the food. That means really getting more honest about what those needs are that we learn to turn off because being a mom doesn't allow any time for ourselves or whatever. Then it makes it easier to not have food as the only method for getting those needs met. And we can spend, in fact I do, when I do the 6-week class, spend one whole week just on that topic, because it's the number one reason why most of us eat, and boring down into that and looking at the reasons why is a really worthwhile thing. And then thinking about that list that I enumerated, emotions, and I want to expand that a little bit. In the emotional realm are all the emotions, anything that creates a sensation in the body. So fear, anxiety, stress, concern, worry, sometimes anger. Sometimes anger works both ways for people, but for some people anger will cause a tendency to eat as a distraction. Fear, definitely. Probably the most common emotions that are associated with eating are the worry, anxiety category of things, because most people feel that in their belly to some extent. Grief, interestingly, as an emotion can work either way. For many people, it's a time that they lose weight because there's such a heaviness in the body. So we carry our emotions as sensations in the body. So think about that whole emotional realm. Also think about this whole kind of spacing out, or I want to call it mindless without, you know what I mean by that. Any ways that you might just be en route. And then also think in terms of habit. I had one woman, for example, tell me that in her family, dinner time meant you sat down and you ate, and it didn't matter if you were hungry or not. In her reality, she was much more hungry earlier in the day, and if she had eaten a robust lunch and called it dinner and had a light soup, her entire health, her well-being, and her weight would have been a non-issue, but she was stuck in this habit. So that's an example. So think about that whole sort of portfolio, and think about the time of day or the situations that are most challenging, and just write yourself some notes, whatever insights come up to you by meshing that together. When we're talking about having time on our hands, empty space, particularly when we've been accustomed to having our time filled with work, kids, job, people, interaction, what's the first thing? Walk through this with me, because this happens for almost all of us, including me. And I do Vipassana meditation, for crying out loud. I sit in silence for 12 days at a time, not talking to anybody, and I still go through this. We have this time, and suddenly we're just in open space. And we ourselves, by ourselves, are going to have to set a structure to fill up this open space. Now, what am I saying here? We have this sense of emptiness. There's suddenly this empty space. What do we do with empty space?
Fill it up.
Bingo! Bingo! The easiest thing that all of us learned to do when we feel empty is to eat. Baby cries, gets the nipple or the bottle. We are so deeply programmed for this. So I'm going to talk before this hour is over about specific things we can do. I'll introduce it now, and I'm going to come back to it again and again. This formula, this action algorithm that we go through between sensation, event, belief, whatever, and eating has several parts to it. And I'm going to encourage you to think of the pause. Start to memorize that. Think of the pause, because in a pause, we have an opportunity to make a different choice. If we have pause with awareness, the awareness is the secret, of course. Pause with awareness gives you a different choice. So I'm going to introduce right now this possibility. You have empty space. I'm going to encourage you to just sit for a little bit and focus on noticing your breathing and noticing I have empty space. And ask yourself the question, what would I like to do, or how would I like to be with empty space? Stop, put in a pause, and at least ask the question. And it might still be a chocolate bar, but at least you would have given yourself the chance to pause and answer that question first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the first thing that popped into my head was guilt.
Uh-huh.
Guilt about having empty space.
Okay, this is beautiful. So I want to table that one. See, I've got 3 pots on the burners now. I want to catch that one, and I want to put that pot on the back burner and come back to it, because we're getting into tools and techniques here. Guilt. Write that one down as if I would forget it. That one is so built in. All right. So we're going to put that on the burner and come back to it. So now we're going to talk about anxiety, feeling pressure. And do you want me to turn this off when I talk? Okay. So we have pressure. We have a deadline. You're under pressure. You've got some work to do. Now, answer me this. What is the belief you have going about what might happen that is causing a reaction?
That might happen if I don't complete the task that I feel pressured to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the whole not good enough thing and the fulfillment of
Bingo,
that
bingo,
from the
bingo.
beginning.
You get it. You get it. So now we're on the same page, and I'm going to take that pot off the back burner. So here's the formula. We have, every one of us, because we have a brain that works in a normal manner, beliefs. We have beliefs. Belief is not reality, but it runs our life as reality. Beliefs show up in a context of events. Within that context, when any particular belief gets activated, it creates sensations. It creates emotions. I'm going to give a completely neutral example that we've all experienced. We're driving in a car, we're late for something, red light, and then a train. And it is a long train, and then it stops. And we're late, and it's a deadline kind of situation, and our boss is going to be there, and we're supposed to present, whatever. So what's going on in the body? Right? I don't even have to tell you, you know. Yeah, the whole, okay, so reality is I'm sitting in a car. That's the only physical reality. Yes, I'm running late, but the physical reality is I'm sitting in a car. The whole physical reaction of the body, the whole tension thing is in response to the thought, the belief, the concern, the worry. It has nothing to do with the physical reality of sitting in the car. Do you see that? So beliefs lead directly to an entire physical sensation reaction. Physical sensation reaction leads to our response. And in this case, what we're talking about as a response is eating. Anxious, eat. Bored, eat. Pressured, stress, eat. So the algorithm is belief in a context creates sensations that lead to reaction. Now, this is the formula that I want to pick apart and tell you that there is a place for a pause in every single part of it. So I'm going to start with the middle part because it's the sensations in our body that are the direct provocateur, or whatever that word is, to our eating. And between having the sensation of boredom, space, kind of aimlessness, don't know what to do with myself, or pressure, tension, between whatever the sensation is and our response, if you build in a pause, and learn to sit with yourself in the sensation without immediately reacting, it gives you a powerful point of change right there. So that's pause number one. And that actually is the easiest pause to work with first, because you can experience, usually the first thing we become aware of as we start to pick this apart and pay attention, become mindful. The first part that we start to get a handle on are the sensations of the body that led to the reaction of eating. So that's the most powerful first place to start with this process, is to learn the technique of observing the sensations and not immediately reacting, building in a pause. And this takes practice. And I'm actually going to lead you in a mindfulness meditation. In the back of that book that I wrote on the CD is a mindfulness meditation. Mm-hmm. So if you want to practice, you listen to that. That's the first meditation. I have several exercises on there.
Okay, good.
And the second main pause point, and this requires deeper self-reflection. You've obviously done some work with this, or at least I'm going to assume that, because you got right to it. And that is that associated with the sensations in the body are the beliefs, the kind of baggage of our past that live in the neurons of our mind as mental constructs that still set things off. Now, this is the deeper work. It's the more long-lasting work to get to that level of roots. But again, just knowing they're there often isn't enough. It still requires a pause. So if you have still I'm going to assume it's the sensations that wake us up. So you can look down the path of reaction, pause, but you can also get curious and say, so where did these sensations come from? And look back up the channel and notice the beliefs. And then there are a whole body of tools you can use with those beliefs. Like, for example, are you familiar with Byron Katie's work? The inquiry. Okay, well, we'll probably not have time for a whole lot of this, but you start to question the beliefs at the level of the simple version of this. Is that absolutely true?
Like stop. That acronym that you use, I don't remember what it stands for, but yeah. Is it true, or am I making it up?
Right. The pause is the secret ingredient that gives you the power and the option to choose to write a letter to a friend rather than eat, to choose to go for a walk around the block, go visit the neighbor who you've been meaning to visit for some time, to write. Now here's my secret for writing books. I set the timer for 17 minutes. And I write for 17 minutes. And if I'm in a flow, I have permission to keep going, but I don't have to.
That sounds like Julia Cameron.
Oh, does it?
The Writer's Way.
So many people mention that. I haven't read that book, but it's the only way I get things done. Sometimes it's 13 minutes. But you get the point. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, mix it up. Create the pause. And then get curious. And look back, if you have the time, energy, wherewithal, up the stream and say, so what led to this? What was I telling myself? What was I thinking? And that's where the juice is. When we start to take apart those tinker toys, we change our life. Sometimes I almost feel like telling my own story. I'm not going to tonight, but I'm here to tell you, you change your life. You get completely different situations that show up as possibilities when you really do that work with gusto. To me, it's why I do this work instead of writing prescriptions now. I think that's really where the juice is in the whole thing. So guilt. Mm-hmm. Anybody here free of guilt? I just want to know. Okay, because I was going to trade places with you and let you talk. So the sensations of guilt, work with me on this. Talk to me about how it feels in your body when guilt comes and shows up.
You feel stiff. You feel crowded. Like you're blocked.
Yes, that's good.
and there's no way you can get out of it.
Yeah, I even heard you breathe, just 2 people breathe the big. So here's how it feels to me. Words, loser, doesn't matter anyhow. What difference does it make? It's not going to, nothing I can do is going to make any difference. It's a failure. The tone is, yeah. So many people I've spoken with who have issues with eating start to do really well, and they trip up on the guilt thing. And they beat themselves up. So the reason I say, please don't diet. Please don't think about losing weight. Please don't think about restricting yourself, is that they have a rebound. And it goes the other extreme. Because the need for solace becomes so acute and so severe that they can't control themselves. And then they hate themselves more. This is where eating becomes an addiction. Eating by itself is not an addiction, but in this particular description that I'm giving, it has classic symptoms of an addiction. It's the getting out of control, hating self, really. I went through a period, I will share this tiny little piece of my life. I went through a period after a particularly difficult divorce in which I, who knew the calorie count of every item on planet Earth and could control my diet, I was disgusting. I was so good. Couldn't. I'd find myself in the kitchen with half the lemon meringue pie gone. And I was feeling sick to my stomach because I'd eaten the whole half. I was completely out of control. And I would say the origins of this book that I wrote started back then, 20 or 30 years prior to that, when I went through this process and I realized that the more discipline I applied to myself, with the more rigor and the more, I would say, self-hatred, the worse it got. And I went from a size 4 to 14 in a matter of months and was still going and going and going. I had one outfit and it was a muumuu, and that was all I could wear. I wasn't about to buy anything else. And so I changed my whole tactic. I started taking bubble baths, which I don't even like, but I did. Going for long walks, actually spending time with friends, which I never had the time to do before, and a variety of other things. And if I ate, I would not punish myself. Above all else, I would not punish myself. And I didn't, when I started finally regaining a former weight, do you see how I said that? Regaining a former weight. I didn't do it by being on a diet. I stopped punishing myself. I've had so many people tell me, my problem is I love food too much. I say, no, it's not that you're not loving it enough. And then I'll hear later, I couldn't believe it. I was scared to death that if I really let myself have the cookies like you said I should, that I would gain 10 pounds before I saw you again. But I couldn't believe it. Half a cookie was all I wanted when I really enjoyed every bite. Now here's a fact, particularly with sweets. You pay attention to this. If you eat, the first few bites you taste, and after that you don't really taste them nearly as much. It's just shoving it in. So it's a form of self-hatred when we do that. It's a form of self-hatred when we do that. So when we unpack this whole thing and start to look at the ingredients that go into our eating and can find and isolate the ways that we're punishing ourselves, hating ourselves, being unkind to ourselves, and start to rewrite our script so that we choose kindness. We're not choosing to deprive ourselves or to be on a diet. We're choosing kindness. And that's our only fundamental question. Sweetheart, what's the kindest thing right here to you? What do you need? What do you want? And what's the kindest thing I can do for you? We let ourselves go there, and we push up against every threshold and every edge that says you're not allowed to. Because it takes bravery and courage to do that, and by God, we're worth it. And we do that. Then it becomes a spiritual practice, this whole eating thing. It becomes an opportunity to ask ourselves the questions of how we can be kind to ourselves in ways that use food as a kind treat and not a punishment. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we have only a few minutes left, so I wanted to spend a few minutes just asking if there were any other questions or comments. You guys all already have some bit of wisdom. Obviously, some of you have done some work with yourself already. So anything else on your minds?
So you were saying, I just want to make sure I've got this succession right. Your beliefs, pause, sensations, pause, and response.
Right, yes. And what I would encourage is that wherever you catch yourself in that, a lot of times we don't catch ourselves until we've eaten, after we've eaten, or while we're eating. So wherever you catch yourself, stop there and go one step back. So if you catch yourself in the middle of being halfway through the pint of Haagen-Dazs, say, what am I doing? Stop. Okay, what am I feeling in my body that I'm doing this? Notice the anxiety or whatever it is. Just notice that. And then focus. So the good thing to do with that, I'm going to dwell on this a little bit, is particularly with anxiety. In fact, let me lead you in a meditation right now for this particular thing, because this is really helpful to practice when you notice the sensations that you're having. And that is, if you want to close your eyes for this, it might make it easier for you to concentrate on the feelings of your body. Just allow yourself to notice your breath. Just focus for a minute on your breath. Feeling your breath come in and go out. Notice that the chair is supporting you, so you don't need to do anything else. You can just focus on your breath for a moment. You don't need to make your breath do anything. Just notice how it easily comes in and goes out. And then become aware of the bottoms of your feet. Just be aware of the feelings of the bottoms of your feet. And aware of your breath coming in and going out. Just notice that. Notice that the chair is supporting you. Be aware of your breath coming in and going out. And be aware of the bottoms of your feet. Very simple anchoring technique. So you come right down into your body. And as you do that, be aware that the sensations that you might have had of anxiety or any other emotion begin to relax of their own. So it's very much like looking for a star in the sky. You have to relax the eyes and look just beside it, and you see it more clearly. So with the sensations in the body, if we try to make them go away or try to control them, we tend to aggravate the situation. Whereas if we bring our focus, just shift it slightly to notice our healthy body relaxing in the chair, focus on the breathing, and feel the bottoms of your feet. Just be aware of your body. The sensations all by themselves, the anxiety starts to relax a little bit, and it gives you the breathing room that you need to make a different choice. This is very, very simple, but very powerful. You can open your eyes whenever you feel ready now. So that whole little thing took 2.5 minutes. And do you see how powerful that can be? So that's the pause I'm talking about at that part of the formula. So if you catch yourself when you're in the middle of eating, the only rule I'm going to give you tonight is do not beat yourself up. It's the only not I want to give you. Do not beat yourself up. Deprivation, punishment will make it worse because your poor body is trying to survive in there at the end of a big stick. So when you catch yourself at that point, come to the pause, come to your breath, feel your feet, just spend a minute with yourself. This is so simple, we almost sometimes want to make it more complicated. But just practice, practice, practice. So that's the pause there. And we are out of time, but the pause farther upstream gets much more deep into the juice of it, and that's, a whole body of work. You can see how powerful this is. I've been teaching transformational workshops since 1982. And when I started teaching mindful eating, I was shocked at how rapidly these were people who had never meditated before, any such thing, and things were just, never done any psychological work on themselves, and things were just popping out like crazy. And I realized it's a very powerful, powerful